NewsNation Prime.
And thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Natasha Zubes. We are tracking multiple evolving stories right now. The latest in a cold case out of Hawaii. A former state deputy attorney general is behind bars tonight, arrested for allegedly stabbing and killing a 19-year-old in Honolulu in 1972. The stunning piece of evidence that just now led to his arrest. And we are taking you live to the rally in Ohio. Any minute now, former President Trump will be speaking, rallying for GOP Senate candidate J.D. Vance. And as he stumps for the GOP nominee, he is standing in the shadow of his Mar-a-Lago investigation. We will bring you there live as soon as his speech begins. First, let's get to tonight's big story. Republican governors sending more busloads of migrants to Democratic strongholds. This morning, Governor Greg Abbott sent another round of buses to New York City and to the Vice President's home in Washington, D.C. NewsNation correspondent Joe Khalil joining us live from our nation's capital. Joe?
Natasha, you're right. Another busload of migrants dropped off right behind us at the vice president's residence here. The second time this has happened since Thursday, and it may not be the last time. And look, as the nation continues to grapple with this issue, it's these migrants whom aid workers told me today are mostly seeking asylum that are caught in the middle. This morning, more busloads of migrants, mostly from Central and South America, arrived in New York City and Washington, D.C., sent from Texas. The latest chapter on the immigration front, which has turned a national issue into a political battle between states.
I think what we're continuing to do is use every tool at our disposal to insulate the state of Florida from the negative ramifications of his reckless border policies.
Governor Ron DeSantis Friday defended busing migrants to sanctuary cities and states, criticizing the Biden administration for what he sees as lax border policies contributing to an influx of migrants to the southern border.
Why don't you go down there and look what some of those communities have to deal with every day?
Florida committed $12 million of its budget to transporting undocumented people out of the state.
If they will not go to the border, we're taking the border to them so they can see the challenges.
Governor Greg Abbott, too, who was first to send busloads of migrants from his state elsewhere, says Texas border towns with significantly smaller populations than New York or Chicago are less equipped to handle migrant surges than big cities. Abbott says expect more buses to come. So far, migrants have been sent to Chicago, New York, D.C., and one group via plane to Martha's Vineyard, now on a military base in Cape Cod. Democrats nationwide continue to condemn migrant busing. President Biden said Thursday Republican governors are using human beings as political props.
We know what they're dealing with on the southern border, but we also don't want to be in the middle of a political stunt that's really harming human beings.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser says she's reaching out to the federal government for help. Other Democratic leaders like California Governor Gavin Newsom and Florida State Agricultural Commissioner Nikki Fried say they're looking into legal action against Republican governors. Fried laid out a potential case exclusively to NewsNation.
Looking at federal statutes and federal laws and codes, there might be some additional smuggling and human trafficking components of this that need to be investigated by the Department of Justice.
As the issue becomes politicized, housing, feeding, and helping migrants with their legal asylum claims has fallen mostly to nonprofits and NGOs.
We definitely needed a lot of more structured support and resources. It feels like every day when buses arrive, we're telling people, sorry, the homeless shelters are full. We're scrambling to find people housing. So in that sense, it's been overwhelming.
And Natasha, you put yourself in the shoes of some of these migrants, as if there's not enough uncertainty already in their lives. What we're hearing is that the New York City Commissioner on Immigration says that a lot of the migrants that ended up in New York are from Venezuela, and they want to go to Florida, where there's a big Venezuelan population. Many of them may already have family members or connections in Florida. He says that New York City may commission buses to take them there. Again, yet another layer in what is already a really complex situation.
And another leg of a long journey. Joe Khalil live for us in our nation's capital. Thank you so much. And we do want to take a look at the legal side of this issue. So we are joined now by Raul Reyes, an immigration attorney and activist. Raul, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Let's start with what we just heard in that report. And I think a lot of questions that people have. Does an asylum seeker actually have a choice in where specifically that they go here?
Generally, when migrants are processed at our southwestern borders, they are not necessarily owed a choice in terms of where they want to go. It really depends on a case-by-case basis and the officials in that area, what resources they happen to have. What jumps out to me about these cases we're seeing now, where governors are busing and in some cases flying migrants around the country, is that from a legal perspective, they are walking a very fine line. Our Supreme Court has been very clear, most recently in 2012 in Arizona versus the United States, that immigration matters are the jurisdiction of the federal government. We saw that again in 2013 when Alabama tried to also impose its own immigration measures. So whatever Governor DeSantis or Governor Abbott may have in mind with these measures, or however they justify it, there really is not a strong legal case to be made. I think it's very likely that we will see the Department of Justice pushing back and filing a lawsuit against them again, because immigration matters are not within the province of governors. It is a federal matter.
Interesting. So help elucidate for us. I mean, is it illegal for Florida to use taxpayer funds to charter a flight for migrants from Texas, for example, to another state?
Because of the fact that Florida's governor is transporting migrants from Texas, that's honestly something that we have not seen before. So I can't speak to that case specifically. What I can speak to is that we have heard in the case of the migrant loan to Martha's Vineyard that there seems to be some type of level of deception involved, where some of these migrants were promised jobs. They were promised that when they got to Massachusetts, they would get housing and be well provided for. So there seems to be in some of these instances a level of potential fraud, which is something that Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice should absolutely investigate. And as well, I think it's very important that we not lose sight of, as we're discussing and weighing in on what these measures are doing around the country. Let's think about what they are not doing. Moving migrants around the country, flying them to blue states, it is not making our border more secure. It is not deterring any more potential undocumented immigrants. It is certainly not contributing to advancing any type of meaningful immigration reform. So these do amount to a type of political theater, political stunts in a year, in a midterm election year.
You know, yesterday we had a panel on this topic, and journalist Megan Basham weighed in. Raul, I want to listen to that quickly and want to get your reaction.
Sure.
At the same time, I don't necessarily think there's everlasting trauma being in Martha's Vineyard, so long as these migrants are not lied to.
I'm sorry, we had a technical issue there. Basically, and I want to summarize here and choose these words carefully, Megan Basham, when she joined us, did present sort of the other side of this very politicized argument. And it is an argument that we've heard before, that, Martha's Vineyard, for example, is a well-known vacation spot within this country. What Megan had said is that, yes, absolutely, these migrants had faced atrocious and difficult circumstances in crossing the border and getting into this country. But for those who say that getting on what she said, an air-conditioned bus and arriving at one of the main vacation spots in our country, to call that trauma would be mischaracterizing it. Raul, can you give us any insight into what migrants are telling you about what the experience of being bused to places like Martha's Vineyard is actually like?
Well, I understand her point, but I think the experience for these migrants of being transported to places like Martha's Vineyard or New York City is completely disorienting. And that's something that did not have to be. Because, for example, once Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott committed to taking these actions, they could have alerted authorities in these destination states that they were sending undocumented immigrants there. They would have been better prepared to receive them, to have different available facilities or resources. In the case of Martha's Vineyard, that is a very small, it's a lovely, very elite community, but right now it is certainly not set up to process migrants, even if it's only a few dozen. The more logical place to have sent them would be, say, a large city like Boston, New York City, or even a state capital. What the governor is doing is deliberately sending migrants to Martha's Vineyard, knowing that they were not initially ready for them, thereby deliberately sowing a level of chaos and confusion. And again, this is very harmful to our system because consider this, and this is just a fact, this is not my opinion. From start to finish, the average asylum case takes nearly 4.5 years to complete. By randomly sending potential asylum seekers around the country, it only elongates that process. It is not serving any broader purpose other than perhaps the political motives of these governors. And in the case of the Martha's Vineyards, the migrants being sent there, I think for Governor DeSantis, it could backfire politically because most of them are Venezuelans. And the state in the United States with the largest Venezuelan population is Florida. And those Venezuelan Americans tend to vote for Republicans. They tend to lean towards the GOP. But this is a measure that could well backfire as these Venezuelan Americans take offense at the way he is treating people from their country of origin.
All right, Raul Reyes, certainly appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Pleasure.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.